spot
Which people are treated badly?
on. The Afrikaans-speaking community.
How are they treated badly?
Well, we've just seen an act signed by President Ramaphosa.
So in South Africa, the South African government and South African president have just signed off on a law which makes it legal for land seizures or land expropriation, as they call it, from white farmers.
We are experiencing a war-like situation with more than 22,000 people being murdered each year, hundreds of thousands of people being affected by crime each year. Thousands of our people and children are being murdered and raped on a daily basis. I'm a boer and farmer, and since the ANC came into power, thousands of white farmers were murdered and tortured to death on their farms. This being actively encouraged by the EFF and ANC.
Certain people are treated very badly. That is 100% spot on.
Which people are treated badly?
The Afrikaans-speaking community.
How are they treated badly?
Well, we've just seen an act signed by President Ramaphosa that is specifically targeting the existence of Afrikaans schools and specifically targeting then the cultural survival of Afrikaans-speaking communities. And we try to solve that.
So you don't agree that the Bella Act tries to incorporate all uses of languages in schools? You disagree with that?
Yes, it doesn't. If you go that way, we must just ignore what was said. There is serious land grabs where the government is not acting. And this is why the Expropriation Act is so threatening, because we are seeing this at the moment.
So you disagree. I'm sorry, I don't have much time, Mr. Kriel. So you disagree with the statement South Africa's confiscating land and treating certain classes of people very badly. You disagree or agree with that, yes or no?
I agree with that people are treated very badly.
Confiscating of land.
There is a serious threat to property rights. The wording there was incorrect.
So in South Africa, the South African government and South African president have just signed off on a law which makes it legal for land seizures or land expropriation, as they call it, from white farmers. Basically what this law says is that if anyone can show that there's been any historical reason or historical abuse that's gone on by the landowners or by the farmers, even going back 50, 100 years when apartheid was in place, then that land can now just be seized from those farmers or expropriated and given to the South African black population. Now many people might say, well yeah, under apartheid this land was taken wrongly, there was abuse by those people, but that may well have been 50, 80, 100, 150 years ago, and in many cases the land may not have been seized. It was just used for farming. And yes, those grandparents or great-grandparents may not have been the nicest of people, but what this is going to cause is exactly what happened in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe used to be recognised as the breadbasket of Africa. It was a very agriculturally rich and very rich country. And then Robert Mugabe took it over, passed very similar laws. Sorry about that. Very similar laws which took away all the farmland from people. And it turned much of the farmland in Zimbabwe into dust bowls. It caused mass starvation, mass poverty, mass migration. It absolutely destroyed the country. And I would imagine very similar things are going to happen now in South Africa. There's been huge violence against white farmers that's not been making the news. Rapes, murders, burnings, pillage of those farms. And now that's just been made legal. So what's going to happen? Well, what's going to happen is, other than the very, very toughest, all those farmers are going to flee their land. The farms are going to get handed over to people that don't know how to run them, don't know how to run agriculture properly, don't know how to farm properly, and they're going to fall apart. And that's going to lead to starvation, it's going to lead to poverty, it's going to lead to all the workers that currently work on those farms getting thrown out of work, and it's going to lead to the collapse of the South African farming industry completely. And yet that's apparently a good thing, and it's all in the name of equality. Well done.
The current leaders of South Africa, these are people who love communism. These are people who openly celebrate Zimbabwe's Robert Mugabe, who was a guy who killed tens of thousands of his own citizens. So these are people I wouldn't want to go to dinner over their house, much less have a conversation about how to run the world. But the Expropriation Act, this is something that the current government's been trying to get in since about 2018. And as they've been doing this, they've been saying this is a revolutionary policy. What it essentially does is it allows them to take money from take land from farmers without giving them anything in return, with zero compensation. So they've been bragging about this. This is going to change South Africa forever. It's going to be amazing. And then Trump comes back, and Marco Rubio come back and say, this seems like a revolutionary policy that might change South Africa forever. And then they say, oh, right. No, actually, it's insignificant. It's something we'll never use again.
And we should say, Wade, the justification in South Africa is that the population is 7% white and 70% of the land is owned by whites. And of course, they used to have apartheid. So right. They are calling it racial justice to expropriate this land, right? You had a fascinating conversation where you talked about the underlying motivation, though, is revenge. Like what's happening is taking out revenge on people who are related to the people of the past.
Yes, this is a conversation I had with Ernst van Zyl from AfriForum. It really is about settling old racial scores. So the truth is that these are people who have been doing stuff like this since they came to power in the 90s. We assumed that ever since apartheid ended, that everything was just racial harmony all the way down in South Africa. But it's been a pretty brutal place to live, especially for these farmers. And yes, a lot of this land is owned by white South Africans, specifically Boers, which is a word that literally means farmer. But yes, it's farmland. So this is land that they're trying to take back. And most of these places it's not that they're going to just take over that land and keep farming. This is land that people have been on. I believe when I talked to my friend from South Africa, he said his family has been there since the 1600s. So this is not something that started back in the 1980s and can now be totally redressed within one generation.
My friends, there's a lot to unpack in this video, but personally, I don't believe that South Africans are the biggest fans of communism. In fact, I believe that these new sanctions are being used as political tools to pressure SA into making a political decision that will be very beneficial to the United States. And that, as brutal and perhaps unfair as it is a very smart and strategically optimal move. But anyway, I want to know your opinion. Do you think this journalist's opinion represents the opinions of other Americans? Personally, I don't think so, but let me know what you think in the comments, and I want to wish you all the best.
My name is Davy Wessels. President Trump, I see a lot of liberals wants to tell you what's going on in South Africa. Well, on ground level, our situation is dismal. And yes, you are correct in your assumption that South Africa is a failed state. We are experiencing a war-like situation with more than 22,000 people being murdered each year, hundreds of thousands of people being affected by crime each year. Thousands of our people and children are being murdered and raped on a daily basis. I'm a Boer and farmer, and since the ANC came into power, thousands of white farmers were murdered and tortured to death on their farms. This being actively encouraged by the EFF and ANC. People are dying in state hospitals, always, waiting for days to be admitted for standard procedures. All the while, the ANC cadre steals the money, which is supposed to go to the needy. All state institutions are failing, and the woke liberal DA are the ones signing the expropriation law into power, since they are part of the ANC-led government. The situation is so bad currently that if a loved one doesn't answer their phone, you're immediately worried about what could have happened to them. The woke liberals and the ANC is trying to paint a rosy picture. But if you want our help in your investigation, we will show you the reality on ground level. We already gathered 50,000 signatures in 2 days in support of this message of us. And it is to be handed over in a huge gathering by our fellow Boers and Patriots Saturday the 15th at the US Embassy in Pretoria. This gathering is organized by myself and fellow Afrikaner Willem Petzer. We sincerely hope this message will reach you, and we want to thank the international community for their continued support.
Alright, so there's been a lot of misinformation being spread by mainstream media as well as woke leftists that are trying to tell you that the Expropriation Act is in actual fact not expropriation without compensation. Yet, in the very first sentence of the act, that was signed into law by the president, it says to identify certain instances where the provision of nil compensation may be just and equitable for expropriation in the public interest. It's right there. If you don't believe me, go to the Expropriation Act and download it and read the very first sentence. Nil compensation is mentioned 3 times in this act. Oh, and also, it's not just land, it's movable and immovable property, meaning your firearm, your watch, your TV, your car. It's not just land. Stop falling for mainstream media bullshit.
Trump appeared to be reacting to a land expropriation law enacted last month by South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, one that makes it easier for the state to seize land in the public interest. The new law aims to address the gaping land ownership disparity in South Africa, a result of decades of white minority rule under apartheid. White people make up around 8% of South Africa's population, but own 3/4 of the nation's freehold farmland. In response to Trump, Ramaphosa said the South African government has not confiscated any land and that he looks forward to clarifying the land reform policy with Washington.